Hello, welcome to Miracle Road. I want to talk today about St. John of the Cross, who was known for miracles. But have you ever felt in your spiritual walk? Have you ever felt dryness, maybe emptiness, and maybe just like it almost felt like God was had, there was just no connection, maybe no desire. Emptiness, dryness in the spirit, inability to pray, or lack of desire, basically an emptiness, and maybe a feeling that God has abandoned us. That is the dark night of the soul. Talks about a time when St. John of the Cross had tried to reform the monastery. And that didn't go too well. They threw him into prison for 8 months, where they had him locked in a closet. Maybe they were feeling a lack of connection. Maybe they were feeling dry about their faith, and maybe had bought into it wholeheartedly. Perhaps I'm just speculating with that, but at any case, they were apparently were not looking for a deeper journey in the way that John was in wanting to reform it. And so they throw him in this closet. Imagine that, being locked up in some kind of closet for 8 months. And now John is one of the great mystics of the church, and he didn't just sit in there and waste time necessarily. I mean, he's a man of prayer, and he delved into prayer and meditation during this time and had incredible visions. His book, there you can see it. Dark Night of the Soul is a spiritual classic. It's a great book. It really is a great book. Recommend that. And John, in terms of miracles, John was known, had been seen by many nuns levitating in prayer. So something was going on there. How you get to that stage, John could perhaps enlighten. He's locked in this miserable state in this closet for 8 months, and during this time he writes this book, Dark Night of the Soul. I'm not going to try to give you a summary of the whole book. It's an amazing book. It's absolutely a miraculous book, and goes deep into his visions and all the inspirations and lessons he learned in the time that he was contemplating God and during this time. But it wasn't all ecstasies that he was experiencing. At times there was great aridity and emptiness and sorrow, and disconnection from God, or like a feeling that he had been abandoned for God, which is perhaps why he titled his book Dark Night of the Soul. It was a sort of dark night that he went through. And I just want to give you a little, just scratch the surface here by just giving you a few key points here. He talks about in chapter 10, and he talks about this is during the time of aridities, a spiritual person, where a spiritual person suffers great trials, and fear sets in. Fear. Now, where does fear come from? God does not give us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind. But no, this is a time of aridity where fear sets in, and fear may come from the devil, thinking that all spiritual blessing is over for them. So they're thinking, well, God, I feel this emptiness, this fear. That all spiritual blessings have gone away from me. God has pulled back from me because I'm a failure, because I wasn't good enough. I sinned. I didn't measure up, and so God has abandoned me. And so it can lead to depression and emptiness and hopelessness if not seen properly. And they find no hope and pleasure in things like prayer, church. So these souls often sadly turn back, and they abandon the road. Which is the last thing that we want to do, because as Jesus says, he who endures to the end, the same shall be saved. So we don't want to turn back. But that's what often happens. They run into fatigue of their efforts, and imagining they're failing through negligence. And John writes, God is now leading them, however, by another road. They're not seeing that God is actually leading them by a different road than the road of comforts and feelings. No. God is leading us by a different road, maybe a more mature road where we aren't dependent on feelings. So God is now leading them by another road, which is that of contemplation. Let them trust in God who abandons not those who seek him. So we go into this time of emptiness and where we feel empty, like we just aren't feeling God. God isn't with us anymore, and we don't feel that connection, that pull. And John writes, let them trust in God who abandons not those who seek him. So God hasn't abandoned us. Let us trust in God. He's leading us down another road, one that isn't dependent on feelings. And John writes, but to allow the soul, don't worry about trying to force thoughts and prayers and that kind of thing and try to force spiritual exercises. But John writes, but allow the soul to remain in peace and quietness. So just take a load off your mind and allow the soul to remain in peace and quietness. This is how he recommends addressing this kind of state. Peaceful, without anxiety. Because a lot of times it's like, I have this anxiety because I feel I haven't measured up. God has abandoned me. I'm a failure and I'm doing something wrong. And so there's anxiety. But he says, no, peaceful, being without anxiety. Remain in peace and quietness, because they can neither do nor... See, the problem is, as John writes here, in this state, we can do nothing profitable. They can neither think nor do anything in prayer. Like, prayer is sort of a bleakness and emptiness. And we can't think anything profitable in prayer. And John writes, to make any effort of its own is, with its interior faculties, it will hinder and lose the blessings which by means of that peace and ease of the soul God is instilling. So to make any efforts of its own, it will hinder and lose the blessings. So the more we try, the more we lose the blessings in this state. Because the blessings aren't of our words and our thoughts or our emotions, but the blessings are of the peace and the lack of anxiety that God brings us. John writes, when the soul desires to remain in inward ease and peace, any operation, an affection or attention where we seek to indulge will distract it. So in other words, when the soul desires to remain in this inward peace, as we should in this state, the more we try to force things through, let's say, thinking and prayer, that can actually hinder this. That can actually get in the way. He writes, wherein the soul seeks to indulge itself, will distract it and disquiet it and make it conscious of aridity. So, therefore, stay in the state of peace. Focus on the peace, the meditation. For John writes, for the more a soul endeavors to find support in affection and knowledge, the more it will feel the lack of these. So it's not about the intellect and the seeking for knowledge, but it's more about that, the staying with the peace, being in peace with no anxiety, meditation on God. So there you go. Those are just some thoughts from St. John of the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul, a man who. This book is, I certainly do recommend reading it. His own meditations are what he went through was he had miraculous visions, and obviously he's associated with miracles in his own life. And sometimes if we do feel a sense of emptiness, these kind of strategies can hopefully bring us back on the right road and realize that God has not abandoned us, but He's taken us down a different road that's not necessarily a road of intellect or feelings, but it's a road of meditation and just retreating into the peace, a state of peace. Thanks for watching.